CQ Poda.
Hey everyone, it's Tango Oscar Mike with another episode of what I'm going to call Tailgate Talk. Today I'm going to talk about digital modes. I recently did a drill using digital modes, and I do a lot with digital modes, and I use Raspberry Pis a lot, and I've been doing it for a long time. And I kind of have my kit dialed in now. At least I think so. It works for me. And so let's go over it. So Raspberry Pis are great for digital modes in the field. You can do WinLink on them. You can do FLDigi, JS8 call, FT8, etc. I like Raspberry Pis because every Raspberry Pi is the same. The one I have, the one you have, it's all the same. If everybody's using different laptops, if you buy a laptop, every laptop is a little bit the same, a little bit different, and sometimes you have software problems. And if you buy a laptop and you're using for other stuff, it's not a dedicated device for your Go kit, and you run into problems there. Raspberry Pis are great. The thing with a Raspberry Pi is you have to have a screen and a keyboard, and you can run the Raspberry Pi headless by using your phone and VNC, but I'm the type of person that likes to have a screen on my Raspberry Pi. If something would go wrong with my Raspberry Pi, I want to be able to access the Raspberry Pi no matter what. So there's a couple of options, and I'm going to kind of go over a couple of different options for the Raspberry Pi. First, let's talk about screens. This is a portable screen that I bought years ago from Sunfounder. I believe it's 1024 by 768 resolution. The reason I bought this screen is it'll run off of 12 volts. This screen pulls about a half an amp of power when in use. So it works great. It has an HDMI port, also has the old VGA, and it has speakers built in, so it'll actually do sound over HDMI, which is great. This screen works great. It's not real clean on the back. It's got these legs that stick out, which you could remove to make it more slim and everything, but it works, and it's been a good screen. This is the larger of the options. Keyboard. This is the keyboard that I use at home a lot. This is a Logitech keyboard. It uses a dongle. That's this little USB receiver that stores away nicely in here. It uses AA batteries, two AA batteries, but it's a nice keyboard, and it's big enough that you can type normally on. I am a touch typist. Took typing classes when I was in school. It's helped me in my computer field greatly. But the touchpad's nice on here, but it's been a great keyboard. I love that you just plug the USB drive in. You don't have to install any drivers or anything, and it works all the time. It's good. These items here really aren't that portable. You can take them portable, but they're not ultra portable, let's call it. So let's go over ultra portable. They make a lot of other smaller screens that you can buy on Amazon or Adafruit. They also make larger screens that are external and everything else. This is my Raspberry Pi currently. I just had this case 3D printed. Up until now, it wasn't in a case. It's just been sitting on my desk. This is the Pimoroni Hyperpixel screen, and it's a 800 by 480 screen. This screen is not big enough. It's big enough to use for a terminal, but when you're running applications like FLDigi, JS8 call, or MBEMS, the application doesn't fit on the screen. And there's a lot of times you can't even see the top bar to drag and drop the window around, and that is a problem. There's some keystrokes that you have to remember all the time, and that's the Alt key, spacebar, and M. In any application, you hit Alt Space M, and then you can use the arrow key to move the window around the screen so you can see the parts that you want to see. Okay, so I wanted to show you what it's like with using a 800 by 480 screen with the Raspberry Pi. There's nothing wrong with this resolution, but I just wish you could get a higher resolution in a smaller screen. Even the 7-inch official Raspberry Pi touchscreen is only 800 by 480. Um, so if I open something like, I'm going to open my FL Digi Suite, which is something I use. And it's going to open FL Digi. It's also going to open FL Rig, uh, FL Message, and FL Amp because all those are used in conjunction with each other. Now, the first thing you may notice is it opened all the windows on top of each other. You really can't see anything. And I can see the menu bar up here. So I could go up here to the menu bar, but I don't have the option to move. And I can't drag and drop this area because I can't see the actual top title bar yet. And this is what I was talking about with a small screen. So again, the tips I mentioned is hit Alt space and then the letter M. So if I hit Alt space and the letter M, now I can move the screen using my arrow keys. Or if I have a mouse hooked up, I can use it by using the mouse as well. I'm VNC'd into my Raspberry Pi, but because I have the hyperpixel screen enabled, the HDMI port is going to give me the same resolution as the hyperpixel screen. But now that I have that, I can move it around. I can either lock it into position by clicking the mouse button once or by hitting the Enter key on the keyboard. So now that I have the title bar, I can just grab it and move it if I want to, or minimize it. The same with this FL amp window. I can't minimize it. Well, actually, I think I can. Yeah, I can't even minimize it here by using the menus. So if I hit Alt space and then M, now I can move it down with my arrow keys, hit Enter, and now I can minimize it. And you can see my FL Digi window here. Not all the information is on the screen. Alt space M. If I scroll up, you can see the other information that's displayed at the bottom of the window that I might have to change. So if you have to change something, this could be a little bit of a pain in the butt. Again, you can move it around with your mouse once you have that engaged. Click to lock it in place, minimize it. And then up here on the menu bar, I can bring these items back up and close them if I want to when I'm done. So you can use a small screen that is not big enough for the application. All of these applications seem to be designed in 1024 by 768. In 1024 by 768, the application just perfectly fits on the screen and you can see everything, all the menu bars and stuff like that. But you can't quite see as much information as you may want. So that's the minimum size I would recommend, 1024 by 768. And that's what my 10-inch HDMI screen, that 12-volt screen that I showed is. It's just barely big enough. That screen's several years old. You can get higher resolution screens now in a 10-inch, but I haven't seen a higher resolution in a 7-inch or even an 8-inch screen. Like I said, the official Raspberry Pi screen, the 7-inch touchscreen, is only 800 by 480. And for me, the hyperpixel screen is clear enough. It's only a 4-inch screen, but even looking at it on the Raspberry Pi, it's clear and I can read all the characters and stuff like that, just like I would read anything on my phone. So it is a high resolution screen. I'll show you another instance where I have trouble with a small screen, and that is running Pat WinLink. So if I go to the Pat menu, this is KM4ACK's script. As you can see, I can't scroll down and I can't move this window up any further because it hits the top of the screen. So again, that Alt space M works, and I can scroll up on the Pat WinLink to select other options. But that's how you can use these applications with a smaller screen. I didn't know that. It was a tip that I had to find out for myself. Somebody mentioned it, and I was able to find it and use it to move windows around. So that lets me use this tiny, tiny screen that's just slightly bigger than the Raspberry Pi in the field for emergency comms. It's not ideal, but that with the small keyboard is ultra portable. I don't know of a more ultra portable system. Like I said, you can run the Raspberry Pi headless using your phone, but if something happens to your Raspberry Pi and you can't get the wireless signal to come up, you're not going to be able to connect headless. So I like having a screen directly connected to the Raspberry Pi. Or if something happens to my phone or I forget my phone at home, something like that, then you have that extra point of failure. If my phone battery goes dead, yeah, I could recharge it in the field. Or if I want to use my phone for something else too. Then that's why I like having a screen hooked directly to the Raspberry Pi, even if I'm not using it. Even though I have the WinLink on the Raspberry Pi, I can use a browser to connect to my phone to access the WinLink, PAT WinLink website to send and receive and do some control there. But I like having that extra ability to use the screen on the Raspberry Pi if I need to. And I do keep spare SD cards, so if one would fail, I have another SD card that I can pop in and basically get my system back up online. By getting very quick at doing the Alt-M to move the window around to where I want it so I can see the rest of the screen, I found this usable. And for as often as I use it in the field for doing small things, I think that's fine. But I like having it boot up and having a screen on the unit. The only drawback to having the screen on this unit is that it's not HDMI native. If you take a Raspberry Pi and plug a screen into it that's HDMI native, you don't have to do anything with it. This requires drivers. This screen requires drivers, and it uses the I/O pins. I'm not using the I/O pins for anything else, so it doesn't affect me. But you have to install drivers on this. And once the driver's installed, if you plug in an HDMI screen, it overrides the HDMI resolution, so you're only getting 800 by 480 on whatever screen you're connected to. I wrote a little script that I run that automatically turns this screen off and goes back to native HDMI. So if I plug in this, I can switch it around real quick. But that's my setup. This is a 3D printed case off of Thingiverse. My nephew printed for me, and this thing fits perfectly in here. There's no protection on the screen, but the screen is recessed inside this case. I don't have the touchscreen. Pimoroni makes a touchscreen, but it's so small you can't touch the little buttons and areas you want to. So to me, it was useless. So I did not get the touchscreen. But because I don't have the touchscreen, this is recessed a little bit, so it protects the screen a little bit if it would fall down flat on the ground or something like that. All the ports fit, HDMI, but works great. Keyboard, I used to have, well, I still have it. I had an older keyboard, it was like this, but it wasn't backlit. And I found that when I was using this for things like winter field day and stuff like that, even with a headlamp on, I just found it a pain not to have the keyboard backlit. So this one's backlit. The nice feature about this is the RIA or RII i4. What's nice about this one is it also has a scroll wheel. So if you're looking at a web page or something like that on a small screen or a list of options, you can spin this scroll wheel and zoom up and down. I think this has actually saved me a bit of time. This keyboard is Bluetooth and also has the dongle, which I have plugged onto the back of my Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi has Bluetooth, and I could connect the keyboard via Bluetooth. I just find it's easier just to plug the dongle in. That way I can move it to whatever I want to and be done with it. But works great. Powering your Raspberry Pi in the field. Let's talk about that. I have a couple of options. Actually, I have another one in the house that I forgot to bring out. They make a regular cigarette lighter adapter, and you can get a, I call it a cigarette light adapter, but you know, in a car it's called the 12-volt utility port. And you can use one of those with USB cable. I've got a couple adapters. Here's a little buck converter single USB port. This is very small. This is the one I used recently. I also have this one. This is made by Geary, G-E-R-E-E, Anderson Power Pools, 2 ports. This is 3 amps total output, so if you have 2 devices plugged in, you're only going to get 1.5 into each one. And I think this one is supposed to be a 3 amp as also. I've had problems with the Raspberry Pi giving me low power indications. And that, to me, I thought it was these devices just weren't putting out the true amount they should be putting out. And I found it to be the USB cables. This is a USB cable that came with something else. It's a good, high quality cable. I'm trying to remember what this came with. This might have come with a phone at one time, so it's not a bad cable. This one, this Ecomoto cable, this is a thick cable. You can see it's about 3 feet long. That one's about 3 feet long as well. Again, good connections on it. A very well made cable. Seems like it's pretty hefty wire. I got battery warnings on that one as well. This little short 1-foot cable seems thicker than those two. I don't get any battery warnings when I use this cable. And I've looked on Amazon and I found some other short cables. They even make a 6-inch cable, and I think it has to do with the cable and the dimensions of the wire inside it. I don't know where I got this, and I don't know the dimensions, the gauge of the wire inside this, but it made me look into it a little bit further. And you'll find ones on Amazon that have 24 gauge wire or 20 gauge wire or even 28 gauge wire. So the gauge of the wire and the length of the cable affects the power that is delivered to your Raspberry Pi. So from now on, I'm going with these short USB cables from whatever buck converter, USB converter that I'm using. So this is the setup that I'm using for the Raspberry Pi as of now. And for digital mode, you look at this and say, boy, that's so small and that's compact, that's great. But you have to consider everything else that goes with that. My cat control cable, got to hook that to the Raspberry Pi. My audio cables, this is a little audio USB adapter that I took the case off and shrink wrapped it to make it smaller. I think Julian, OH8STN on Survival Tech Nord on his channel, I saw him do that and I did it too. The reason being is all these ports on the back, I fill up all 4 ports, and once they're all 4, everything's really crammed into there. So cat control, the keyboard adapter, my audio cables, and this little USB dongle, which works great as well. You add all that, and it adds up and makes quite a little bit of a mess on your desk or out in the field when you're portable. But it works. I know the IC705 can do digital over wireless. So all you need to do is power up your Raspberry Pi and you can do digital modes that way. So that's great. But I have a KX2. If you have a 817, a Yaesu 817 or 818 or an 857 or some other Yaesu, you're going to need a bunch of cables as well, adapter cables and so forth. But that's my take. This is what I'm going to be using in the field. I can do WinLink. That's the main thing that I do in the field, use this for, is WinLink. There's not a lot of APRS around here, so I really don't bother with APRS anymore. I've done a lot of testing and I just don't use it. There's not enough use. So JS8 call and FL Digi, the FL Digi, the FL message, those modes, I use that with this. So, but that's my kit for now. I've been pretty happy with it. And I'm going to start taking this every time I go out and at least trying to send one WinLink message out. I participate in WinLink Wednesdays. There's another net on Thursdays that started by somebody in West Virginia. I send a message for their net as well. Plus, I like to send messages out to various people every once in a while that I know use WinLink, like the Tech Prepper and Julian, just to send a message out to them every once in a while, let them know that I'm using this in the field. No, it's been great. The only thing else that I could see you needing in the field in a real emergency maybe would be a printer. And I know they make some really small thermal printers that only print a few characters per line on them. But it might be useful just to get some information out of this if you needed to while you're in the field. With this screen, the Raspberry Pi, and everything plugged into the Raspberry Pi, and don't forget, every time you plug something into this port on the Raspberry Pi, it requires power too. So even though the Raspberry Pi might not actually require that much power, everything else you're plugging into it is going to be powered to, and it's going to require that much more power. But with this screen, the Raspberry Pi, and my radio on, I pull about an amp. That's not during transmit, that's just during receive. As you know, the KX2 only pulls about a quarter of a watt on receive, which means the Raspberry Pi, a quarter of an amp on receive. It means this Raspberry Pi, when it's running, it only seems to be pulling about a quarter of an amp too. And like I said, the screen pulls about a half an amp. But it depends on what your Raspberry Pi is doing too. This is a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus. I have a Raspberry Pi 4, but I've had problems with it, so I went back to the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, and all the issues that I were having cleared up. It could be related to power issues with the 4, and finding something that will produce enough power to run the 4. I've tried the setup with these dongles I have, and I actually have a small USB-C cable that I tried using with my Raspberry Pi 4, but I would still get low power warnings and other issues. So I actually have a couple of Raspberry Pi 3B Pluses that I use on a regular basis. I love being able to switch the SD cards out, and I back up my SD card all the time. I actually have a bunch of backups of this, so even if I take this out and lose it, or it fails, I can slap in another card and take care of it. Sorry, my neighbor's been mowing the whole time I've been doing this, so there's probably been a lot of background noise. But no, that's what I've been doing, and it's been fine. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is Tango Oscar Mike 73. Take care, and get out there and do some digital modes in the field.
Tango Oscar Mike